Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Today, I'm going to be going over the synastry between Taylor and Travis. I did this a couple of years ago, but now I have his correct birth time. So there's even more information that I'm going to reveal. His king and Atropos asteroids conjunct her north node. That immediately caught my attention because if you've watched my channel before, you already know I pay extremely close attention to whatever touches the north node in synastry, because that becomes the main theme in the relationship over time. So right away, you've got his king energy wrapped around her destiny point, the football king, the power couple. This relationship already feels larger than life. But what stopped me cold was his Atropos there too. Atropos cuts the thread. She determines the life and death of something. This is not lightweight relationship energy. This is the kind of connection that permanently alters the direction of both their lives once the door opens. Something will happen in the relationship that brings irreversible endings. Her Atropos asteroid conjuncts his vertex. The orb is wider at about 3.5 degrees, but the vertex still matters in synastry because it's associated with fated encounters and relationships that alter the direction of somebody's life. And because his vertex falls in the 6th house, this relationship may end up changing the reality of his everyday life in a very real way, especially when it comes to his work and his normal day-to-day routines. And now the chart gets even more interesting because her sun and queen asteroid are both on his IC. That is his private world, his roots, the part of his life the public does not really get access to. So now suddenly the energy shifts from public fantasy into something way more intimate because her sun there can make her feel incredibly familiar to him, like she naturally belongs inside his personal world. But then you add her queen asteroid there too, and that changes the atmosphere even more because now she's not just showing up as a woman he's attracted to. She starts taking on this sovereign energy in his world. The woman at the center of the castle, the woman who emotionally feels like home to him. And what makes this even crazier is the fact that in his own natal chart, he has Venus conjunct Queen. So deep down, he looks for a woman who feels elevated, powerful, or larger than life in some way. A woman who naturally carries Queen energy before she even walks into the relationship. Her Isis asteroid is conjuncting his moon. And Isis in astrology has very powerful feminine symbolism. Isis is associated with devotion, sacred partnership, loyalty, and the kind of feminine energy that feels deeply emotionally significant to him. So when Isis is on his moon, the emotional atmosphere between them starts looking much deeper than casual attraction. And the moon is someone's emotional world. It's his emotional world. And Isis touching it can create the feeling that the connection means something sacred for him. And what makes this even more interesting is the fact that Travis already has karma conjunct his moon natally. So emotionally, relationships were probably never meant to feel casual for him in the first place. Moon conjunct karma usually shows somebody who goes through relationships that leave permanent emotional fingerprints on them somehow. So when Taylor's Isis asteroid is directly on top of that karma moon conjunction of his, the relationship starts looking emotionally karmic too. Now, her Medusa and Mars are both conjunct his Venus. So the attraction between them is magnetic and intense, almost consuming at times. Because Medusa in synastry can create this feeling of being completely mesmerized by someone. drawn in almost against your better judgment. And when you add Mars into the mix too, the chemistry becomes extremely physical and hard to ignore. And because it's her Mars conjuncting his Venus, she holds a lot of power in the attraction dynamic. I just hope she doesn't turn him into stone. That's the mythology behind Medusa. And now we get to the flip side of the coin. Underneath all the fairy tale hoopla, this starts getting more complicated because her Melpomene asteroid conjuncts his ascendant. And Melpomene is tied to tragedy, sorrow, and painful emotional themes. In mythology, Melpomene was the muse of tragedy. So this can color the way he experiences the connection personally. The relationship starts carrying emotional weight underneath the glamour, more intense behind closed doors than it appears from the outside. Another darker layer of this chart is the fact that her Medea asteroid is also conjuncting his ascendant. Medea is associated with betrayal, revenge, and the darker side of love once pain enters the relationship. So when you combine that with Melpomene conjuncting his ascendant, the chart starts carrying much heavier undertones underneath all the glamour and mythology. Because now you've got tragedy and betrayal symbolism, both directly on his ascendant. So over time, this relationship could become tied to painful emotional turning points that affect him very personally, which actually validates her Atropos on his vertex I mentioned earlier. Now, her Neptune conjuncts his Vesta. That's very interesting because Vesta has to do with sacred devotion and commitment, but Neptune adds illusion, fantasy, and projection into whatever it contacts. So this can create a situation where he becomes deeply devoted to the idea of her, not just the real woman standing in front of him, but the mythology around her, the fantasy, the dream. Neptune can blur reality, especially in relationships that already exist under massive public scrutiny. So to me, this chart looks emotionally intense, karmic, passionate, and very high stakes. Now, her Mercury conjuncts his Neptune. That can be a red flag because whenever Neptune gets involved in communication, things can start getting blurry. There's fantasy here and projection, sometimes hearing what you want to hear instead of what's actually being said. This can create a connection where they both feel like they intuitively understand each other without always needing words, almost psychic at times. But Neptune can also distort communication inside relationships. Conversations can become vague or unclear, and signals can easily get crossed underneath all the projection and fog. Sometimes this can even turn into manipulation or gaslighting, because Neptune has a way of dissolving clarity between two people. I still think the communication issues in this chart are important, because also his Mercury is conjunct her Requiem and Apophis. I talked about this in the first video, but having the correct birth time now makes this stand out to me even more. Because Requiem and Apophis are not easy asteroids. Requiem carries ending symbolism, and Apophis has to do with destruction and breakdowns. So over time, this could absolutely point toward major communication strain somewhere inside the relationship, especially once the honeymoon phase fades and real-life pressure starts settling in. And here is another indication. His Apophis and Boda are conjunct her south node. So now you've got marriage symbolism, which is Boda, tied directly into destructive and karmic energy at the same time. This does not automatically mean the relationship is doomed or headed for divorce, but it can point toward a connection where love, commitment, and eventual destruction all become tangled together over time. Apophis is the ancient serpent of chaos. And because these asteroids are on her south node, this starts looking even more like a past karmic connection to me, especially with themes surrounding marriage, destruction, and irreversible turning points. And that also ties back into the Atropos symbolism I talked about earlier. All right, let's talk about the moons, because now that I have his correct birth time, I can safely say they do not have any moon-moon connections. And that matters, because the moon is not some minor side character in Synastry. It's a very important luminary. The moon is where you feel emotionally safe, understood, and emotionally nourished. Now, her birth time is still disputed. So if she was born much later in the evening, they possibly could have a moon in conjunct moon aspect instead. But even that is not really emotional glue, because inconjuncts usually feel out of sync, like two people trying to emotionally connect while speaking different emotional languages. So what you're basically seeing here between them is tons of attraction, karmic connections, chemistry, passion because of the Venus-Mars conjunction, and everything else tied to the symbolism and the mythology. But underneath all of that, the relationship can still eventually start feeling emotionally disconnected over time. So to me, this does not look like a connection built on soft emotional ease. It looks more like a relationship surviving on destiny, attraction, image, and commitment instead. And that does not automatically mean they will get divorced, but it can mean that what people see publicly and what the relationship actually feels like emotionally for them behind closed doors may eventually become two very different things. Because the moon in Synastry always tells the truth underneath the surface. Always. So, that's all I have for today between these two. And I will be back soon with more Synastry charts.